Have you ever stopped to observe a ship while it's in the shipyard being repaired or built and noticed that the bottom part, the part submerged in water, is always painted red? It's not a coincidence. It's not a matter of aesthetic taste. And it's definitely not because ship owners around the world secretly met and decided that red was the most beautiful color for the bottom of ships. The truth behind this color choice is much more fascinating and involves chemistry, marine biology, naval history, and even the survival of vessels on the high seas. Get ready, because what you're about to discover will completely change the way you see these giants of the oceans and will make you realize that every detail on a ship exists for a very specific and calculated reason. But before revealing the real reason, let me tell you a story that'll help you understand the gravity of the problem that this simple layer of red paint solves. Imagine you are the captain of an 18th century merchant ship sailing the tropical seas, transporting spices, fabrics, and other valuable goods between continents. Your vessel is your life, your livelihood, and your only protection against the unforgiving ocean waters. But there is an invisible enemy destroying your ship from below. Something you can't see as you sail. Something that is literally eating away at your hull piece by piece. This enemy is not a giant sea creature, not a storm, nor an iceberg, but millions of tiny organisms that attach themselves to the bottom of the ship and begin to grow, multiply, and cause unimaginable havoc. I'm talking about barnacles, mussels, algae, barnacles, and a myriad of other marine organisms that love solid surfaces to cling to and call home. This phenomenon has a technical name: marine biofouling, or biological fouling, and it has been the nightmare of every ship owner, captain, and naval engineer since humans began building ships. But what's the real problem with having some organisms stuck to the bottom of a ship? It seems harmless. Right. Wrong. Completely wrong. When these organisms begin to accumulate on the hull, they create an uneven, rough layer that drastically increases the vessel's friction with the water. Imagine trying to run wearing a Velcro jacket on the outside. That's more or less the feeling the ship has when trying to move with its hull covered in barnacles and other organisms. This increased friction means the ship needs much more energy to move, which translates into absurd fuel consumption. Studies show that a heavy layer of biofouling can increase fuel consumption by up to 40%, representing millions of dollars in losses for shipping companies every year. But the problem doesn't stop there. These organisms aren't just sitting there, peacefully enjoying the ocean view. They are actively corroding the hull material, especially when we're talking about wooden hulls that were used in the past, or even metal, which can suffer accelerated corrosion due to the metabolic activities of these living beings. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but why red specifically? Couldn't they use any color of paint that would prevent these bugs from sticking? And this is where the story gets really interesting, because the answer lies in a specific chemical element that for centuries was the secret ingredient in antifouling paints: copper oxide. Around the 1600s, sailors and shipbuilders discovered that copper had incredible properties for preventing the growth of organisms on ship hulls. They began coating the bottoms of vessels with pure copper plates, and the result was revolutionary. Ships became faster, more efficient, and lasted much longer without needing maintenance. But coating an entire ship with copper plates was extremely expensive, so engineers began looking for more affordable alternatives. The solution was to create special paints containing copper compounds, mainly cuprous oxide, mixed with other ingredients that helped fix the paint to the hull and slowly release these copper compounds into the water around the ship. And guess what the natural color of copper oxide is? Exactly, red. In fact, a very characteristic reddish-orange hue that you've probably seen in oxidized copper pipes or in bronze statues that develop that greenish layer over the original copper. So, when ships began to be painted with these copper-based anti-fouling paints, they naturally acquired this characteristic red color on the submerged part of the hull. And it's not just any red, it's a specific shade that became known worldwide as ship red. This color became so iconic and so associated with maritime navigation that even when paint formulations changed over the years and decades, the naval industry maintained the color standard for reasons of tradition, visual identification, and even for practical safety and inspection purposes. But wait, The story doesn't end with copper oxide, because science and chemistry continued to evolve. In the 20th century, especially after World War II, the chemical industry developed even more efficient compounds to combat by paints with organotin compounds emerged, with tributoltin being the most famous and effective of all. These paints were incredibly powerful, working better than anything that had come before and keeping hulls clean for years on end. The problem is that they were too good, so effective at killing marine organisms, that they began to cause serious environmental damage to ocean ecosystems. Mollusks, especially oysters, began to exhibit reproductive deformities. Fish populations were affected, and the marine food chain began to suffer imbalances in areas of high naval traffic. That's when the international community woke up to the problem. And in the early 2000s, the International Maritime Organization began to ban the use of these toxic substances in antifouling paints. So, what does the shipping industry do these days? How do they keep ships clean without using extremely toxic substances while still preserving that characteristic red color? The answer lies in modern formulations that use copper biocides in controlled concentrations, combined with other compounds that are less harmful to the environment, and slow-release technologies that cause the active ingredients to be released gradually over time, maintaining effectiveness against biofouling but drastically reducing the environmental impact. In addition, modern paints use synthetic red pigments that replicate the traditional color of copper oxide, but which can be combined with different active ingredients depending on the environmental regulations of each country and the specific needs of each type of vessel. There is also advanced research into silicon-based paints that work by creating ultra-smooth surfaces where organisms simply cannot attach, being swept away by water pressure when the ship is in motion, and even coatings inspired by shark skin, which naturally resist the attachment of organisms due to their special microscopic texture. But let's talk about another fascinating aspect of this whole story: the visual and practical issue of the color red. When a ship is at sea, the waterline marks exactly where the ocean surface meets the hull. And this line is crucial for determining if the ship has the correct cargo, if it is stably, and if it is sailing within safety parameters. The red part of the hull is normally submerged, so when juice up a lot of red above the waterline, it may indicate that the ship is undercarrying or has ballast problems. On the other hand, if you can hardly see any red, the ship may be overloaded and in a risky situation. This visual differentiation between the submerged red part and the emerged part, usually painted black, white, or other colors, facilitates quick inspections and safety assessments by port authorities, pilots, and even other ships in the vicinity. Another interesting fact is that not all ships use exactly the same shade of red. Different paint manufacturers have their own proprietary formulations, and each can result in a slightly different shade. You can find ships with darker, almost burgundy reds, others with more orangey tones, and some with brighter, more vibrant reds. Furthermore, the color can change over time due to continuous exposure to salt water, ultraviolet rays from the sun when the ship is undergoing maintenance, and the natural wear and tear of the paint. This is why ships need to be periodically taken to dry docks, which are these enormous structures where the water is drained and the ship is completely exposed, allowing the entire hull surface to be cleaned, inspected, and this maintenance process is absolutely critical to maintaining the vessel's operational efficiency, and can cost hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars, depending on the size of the ship. But it is a necessary investment because the costs of operating a ship with a dirty and inefficient hull are much higher in the long run. And there's more. Antifouling paint technology doesn't just benefit large commercial ships, yachts, sailboats, fishing boats, offshore platforms, and virtually any structure that is permanently or semi-permanently submerged needs to deal with the problem of You've probably seen smaller boats with red or blue bottoms in marinas and ports, and they're using the exact same technology, just adapted for smaller scales and the specific needs of recreational or fishing vessels. The difference is that these smaller vessels sometimes use different colors, such as blue or green, depending on the type of paint and the owner's preferences. But the scientific principle behind it is exactly the same: to create a surface that is hostile to marine organisms that try to establish themselves there. Now consider the global impact of this simple innovation. It is estimated that there are over 50,000 large merchant ships sailing the world's oceans right now, carrying over 90% of all international trade. If each of these ships had its fuel consumption increased by 40% due to uncontrolled we would be talking about a colossal waste of resources, stratospheric carbon emissions, and economic costs that would be passed on to literally everything you buy. From the food at the supermarket to the cell phone you are using to watch this video right now. That simple layer of red paint on the bottom of ships is silently sustaining the global economy and making possible the modern lifestyle we all enjoy. It is one of those perfect examples of how a seemingly simple technological solution can have enormous and far-reaching impacts on a planetary scale. And to conclude this story with an interesting reflection, the next time you are near a port or see photos of ships being built or repaired, pay attention to that red part of the hull. Remember that that color is not there by chance. It is not a random aesthetic choice, and it is not a whim of naval designers. That color represents centuries of accumulated knowledge, trial and error, chemical engineering, technological adaptation, and constant innovation. It represents humanity's struggle against the forces of nature, our ability to observe problems, understand their causes, and develop creative solutions that balance efficiency, safety, economy, and, increasingly, environmental responsibility. It is a story of how something as mundane as the color of paint can reveal layers upon layers of science, history, and human ingenuity. So now you know. The bottom of ships is red because this color is intrinsically linked to chemical compounds that combat marine mainly copper oxide, which was historically used, and whose chemical descendants are still present in modern formulations. It's a visual legacy of centuries of navigation, a tradition that persists because it works and because it has become part of the visual identity of maritime vessels around the world. And if you found this story fascinating, tell me in the comments. Had you noticed this characteristic of ships before, or was this a completely new discovery for you? How many ships do you think you've seen in your life without ever stopping to think about why they were red underneath? And since you've made it this far, and clearly enjoy discovering the mysteries behind the things we see every day, but never stop to question, how about giving this video a like to help more people discover this incredible curiosity? And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now, because every week there's new content dissecting the secrets behind the most common and seemingly simple things in our daily lives, but which hide absolutely fascinating stories when you start to investigate them thoroughly. And speaking of investigating thoroughly, click on that video that's appearing on your screen now, because there's another curiosity there that will blow your mind and make you see the world in a completely different way. So don't waste time and continue this journey of discovery with me.